most people, pre-Giuliani downtown New York invokes images ranging from radical artists to drug-saturated ghettos. From jazz to punk, Christopher Street to Alphabet City, downtown New York was the heart of underground music and culture. I'm James Spooner, and for punks like me, the artists who hung out at landmarks like CBGB's are nothing short of legendary. At the top of that list is Basquiat. Though a decade apart, his New York and mine have a lot in common. Basquiat's connection to the New York art and underground music scene, along with its rejection of the mainstream, expanded his definition of blackness. I think a lot of people might say that my film Afropunk accomplished a bit of that as well. So maybe that's why I've been invited to speak on No Wave and where Basquiat and I overlap. Before New York's ongoing gentrification, the downtown art scene was unlike anything that had ever existed. Basquiat and I both benefited from and produced art that was directly linked to what was happening all around us. When Jean-Michel Basquiat found his way into the East Village from Brooklyn in the late 70s, he was met with a crumbling city on the verge of bankruptcy. He was hanging out at members-only nightclubs for artists and dive bars where uptown hip-hop pioneers were exploring the downtown scene and mixing with avant-garde jazz and post-punk musicians. The scene was exploding. A great example of the influence these people were having on each other is a song you're probably familiar with. Grandmaster Flash and Melly Mel lifted the backing track of their smash hit White Lines from a little-known no-wave group called Liquid Liquid. And of course, Deborah Harry's rap in Blondie's Rapture is another example of cross-pollination. All these kids hanging out every night were creating new and exciting art forms, but the scene was already starting to react to some of the artists who were on the verge of mainstream success. Late 70s playwright Bonnie Greer, in the podcast The Last Bohemian, says, "For me, and a lot of people I was hanging out with, if you saw things like money or fame coming at you, you were sure to go the other way. Because if you lost your credibility, you lost your purpose." Some artists switched gears and began experimenting with abrasive noise and dissonance in their music. It was purposefully inaccessible for mainstream consumption. This music was later dubbed no wave, and it had a clear impact on who Basquiat was as an artist. In my opinion, Basquiat's art looks the way no wave sounds. An untrained raw expression. Bands ranged from Lydia Lunch's Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, whose members were literally just learning to play their instruments, to slightly more seasoned but equally as jarring James Chance and the Contortions. These no-wave artists, audibly, had very little in common with each other than a disregard for musical tradition and a desire to break all the rules. Basquiat's lesser-known work was his no-wave band Grey. They were not for mainstream consumption. Grey gives a little bit more insight into his philosophy as an artist. His scene welcomed art without art school and music without music lessons. The scene encouraged rebellion against norms dictated by art and the music world. Like Basquiat, I entered into an influential punk scene, but mine was a decade later. My scene was rooted in the DIY movement. Falling under the same punk umbrella as no wave, we were also anti-capitalist. Our politics also challenged mainstream ideas of success and the avoidance of mass consumption. The commercialization of punk via MTV and the Warped Tour was still a few years away. My mom and I moved to New York in 1991 while I was still in high school. Our apartment was nestled in the village between Chelsea and Soho. Unbeknownst to me, I was blocks from Basquiat's stomping grounds, where his Samo tag and the ominous quotes that accompanied it were ubiquitous. The days of Max's Kansas City and the Mud Club were over, but the energy and innovation of the downtown scene was very much still alive. I found my community at ABC No Rio, Reconstruction Records, and in Washington Square Park. It was the early 90s, and just like in Basquiat's heyday, something special was happening with music. Where hip-hop was in its infancy during Basquiat's time, it was entering its golden age in mine. At the same time, rave and grunge were swarming the city. The first years of emotional hardcore were also breathing new life into a stale punk scene. The music and cultures of New York City were still fluid because everyone lived so close to each other. Though my focus was on punk, like Basquiat, I bounced between scenes. I was influenced by multiple cultures, which ultimately led to the creation of my film, Afropunk. Afropunk is my documentary, which chronicles the lives of Black kids who, like Basquiat, lived in the underground music and art scenes. I made the film with the same principles Basquiat had acquired in the downtown and no-wave scenes. I was DIY, self-taught, self-produced, which is another way of saying I was broke. Both of our scenes romanticize poverty. It's a way to reject the rules set up by the dominant culture. Sometimes when you break those rules, exciting new ideas and concepts emerge. This is the stuff that changes the world. While all this mixing was happening, there were fundamental differences between the cultures and homes our counterparts returned to. Black artists were still living in a racist society, while a lot of white kids were choosing to be starving artists, with the privilege to change their circumstances if they wanted to. From Basquiat's era to my own, it felt like not a lot had changed. Basquiat and I both went out on our own after high school. We were living in squats and crashing at friends' houses. We were prioritizing art over stability. We were both Black kids in predominantly white scenes. For him, having access to white culture led to critical paintings like Obnoxious Liberals. For me, it led to Afropunk. You know, everyone wants to claim Jean-Michel Basquiat for their own: jazz, hip-hop, and no-wave. But he was all of these things. He was a downtown kid. One thing is for sure, had I made Afropunk in 1981, I absolutely would have wanted him in it.